We are experiencing here in 2020 such a unique moment in our history regarding the issue of race relations in this country. The democratic experiment undertaken nearly 250 years ago has had very challenging moments in trying to live up to the promise for its citizens of color, what Thomas Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence as the right of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. As a product of the 80s, I can pinpoint a handful of truly significant events, such as the Rodney King trial and the O.J. Simpson case, that have garnered the whole attention of our nation and exposed the progress, or lack thereof, of racial tensions here. With over a month's worth of consistent protests taking place in just about every state, these current times have often been compared to that of the social unrest our country experienced in the late 60s. Like today, as then much of the youth found themselves growing up and navigating through very tumultuous but culturally historic times. On today's panel, we welcome Stan Lawrence, Burcy Hines, Priscilla Sibley, and Don Sibley to get their perspectives on what it was like coming of age during the decade of the 60s. All right, thank you all for joining us today. And I think my first question is this. What was it like, growing up in the 50s and 60s, and how do you think that, that era shaped your perceptions on race? Burcy, let's start with you.
Oh, okay. I'm Burcy Hines. Growing up in the 60s and having to attend all-white colleges and attend all-white affairs, it shaped my common sense. My parents were, I would say, free slave. My grandparents were slaves. So it just shaped my common sense to let me know that I was different. And that I had to be stronger. And looking at Dr. Martin Luther King and all the things that took place during that time, it just empowered every young person during the 60s to want to succeed, to want to make something out of their lives, especially after the Vietnam War. So that really, that was just an empowerment. So my experience was I really had to, I won't say suffer, but I really had to be smart, to use common sense. I went to Elmhurst College. I went to Washington University in St. Louis, and it was very difficult. I wanted to be a lawyer, but I was a black woman, and they said, no, be a social worker. So I could give you some nightmares being on campus, I think my foundation came from 3 white teachers who really shaped my common sense for the white community. That was very important. They really told me how, no disrespect, how white people think, who are racist, who have some issues, and how to play the game, and to read the book Games People Play. And that was very, very, very instrumental in moving me forward in that black movement.
Now, Don, you've had an interesting situation. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I actually spent most of the 1960s of that decade in Korea because my parents were missionaries in Korea. So all of the a lot of what happened here in the 60s happened in the distance as far as we were concerned. We were in terms of music and fashion and all of those kinds of things, we were 3 to 6 months behind what was going on here. All the news that we received, at least in English, was filtered through the military news system. So I'm sure there was censorship, I'm sure there was selective reporting. So a lot of what was happening here, particularly in the late 60s, 67, 68, didn't really have much impact on us. I just, out of curiosity, I just pulled up a list of all the riots that took place in '68, multiple cities, but they did not get a lot of press in Korea. So a lot of what was happening here didn't start to impact me until I came back for college in 1969. But I felt like I'd landed from another planet for about the first 6 months that I was here. It took me that long to sort of get a handle on what was going on. I went to the University of New Hampshire. There were a very small number of black students there. They had their own network, I guess is the best way to put it, and we didn't interact a lot. But when one of the things that I was mentioning to you also, Perry, is that when we were back for furlough in 1964 to 66, my family was part of a group, and I need to get more information about this from my mother, but we went down to Washington, D.C. for one of the marches on Washington in 1965. So that was about the closest connection that I got to any of the racial discussions and conflicts that were taking place at that point.
Dan, what about you?
Well, I was born in 1956, so through the 60s I was in elementary school. And in the early 1960s, it was a different time. We were still Negroes back then. And, people, black men who wore, their hair in the process and the conch, they were looked at differently than black men who had short, close cropped hair. And it was a different time. It was still, like the 50s. Black people had difficult times trying to, even educated black people had difficult times getting jobs in certain fields. And I remember that when the fire department came to my grammar school, the fire safety officers came, and just on the side, them telling us, well, there's certain jobs that you can't get in the Chicago Fire Department. Black men can't drive the tender, the back part of the hook and ladder. There was a time when black men couldn't drive the garbage truck. They could only ride on the back. So about 67, 66 is when you started to see things change. The Black Power movement, the Panthers, the young, gifted, and black. But it was also the time of all the turmoil. That's when all the riots and Watts, Detroit, based on, police brutality, all of the riots were starting to take place in this country in the mid-60s. And, you still had the war protests. So it was a very turbulent time, but it was a time of the Black Awakening, the freedom rides going down south, SNCC and CORE, all of the groups that were espousing that, we are entitled to our freedoms, were, at the height of their popularity and power. So the late 60s was a huge time of awakening. That's, when you start seeing the Afros and the Panthers, when food programs were not being provided by the government. The Panthers set up, breakfast programs for the kids, all over the country. So that's what shaped my blackness, seeing, the dichotomy of being told you can be whatever you want to be, but also being told the things you can't be, even though you have to be twice as good as everybody else.
Priscilla, what was your experience like?
Well, I grew up in a small town in Massachusetts, and very white town. When I was in high school, a black family moved into town, and my father and my brother knew them really well because they were very involved in Boy Scouts. But I know it was kind of a jolt to the community. When somebody was about black teachers, and I had to think, I never had a black teacher, ever. Even maybe when I was at Dominican, when it was Rosary, I might have had a black teacher there, but all through elementary school. So I didn't have any exposure. I didn't have any experience. My parents were an interesting mix because they were politically conservative somewhat, but they were very socially liberal. And they championed all kinds of different causes. I was telling Perry about going to Luray Caverns in Virginia as a kid on a camping trip with my family. And we stopped the car, the first stop is at the bathroom, of course, when you've got kids in the car. So I saw these 4 little shacks. There was white women, white men, black women, black men. And I was incensed. I was just dumbfounded. I couldn't believe that was really happening. I sort of heard about it on the news that there was segregation, but I had never been hit in the face with it. And I started talking to my father about, well, that's horrible. They can't tell me they shouldn't tell people which bathroom they can use. And he just looked at me and said, I totally agree with you. I know where you're coming from, but I need to be able to take all my family home with me after this vacation. He just was not in a position, didn't have the courage to do anything about that at that point. And what could one man with a wife and 3 kids do at that point? My high school and college years were totally in the 60s. And, people have mentioned all the stuff going on. The race riots, the women's movement, the Kent State shootings, so there were police problems, Vietnam War, all that stuff was layered and innuendo, but it was a very turbulent time. And as all of you know who lived through the 60s, the 50s were kind of a father knows best, and that whole genre
my 3
of
sons
My 3 Sons and Leave It to Beaver, and that was the ideal family. I always kind of wondered why we couldn't be perfect like them, but that was the whole attitude. And then things started blowing up in the early 60s.
Stan, I want to go back to something you had said. Just curious, would you say that we went from, when did they make the change from Negro to African American? Is that primarily mid 70s or 80s?
No, we went. Let's see. I started out colored / Negro, and then we went to Afro-American, between black and Afro-American, and then they kind of pushed Afro-American to the side and say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. So that was Black and Proud was the late 60s, early 70s. African-American, that was much later than the 60s.
When we come back, we will be discussing ACLU Deputy Legal Director's assertion that he feels that in this current moment regarding race relations, that the U.S. is on the cusp of something significant.
It started as just a voice for the community to lean on, but as we've grown in the past year, we've become an organization for the youth and the community to lean on. We look to inspire through art, music, entertainment, sports, and culinary as they enter the workforce. dreams, you have to put your passion first.
My only point is this: there is a movement in America that has not been in existence in my lifetime. I was 11 years old in Memphis when King was shot and killed, and I was young, but I was old enough to know enough. And what I'm telling you is the discussions about racial equality that were going on then are nowhere near as deep, as intense, and as revealing as the discussions that are going on today. As scared as I feel and as frustrated as I feel with what's going on in this country, there is a part of me that says we are on the cusp of something. This is a freaking tipping point. And it is going to go one way or the other. Taking down these monuments will not cure the problem, but it is at least an indication that we are ready to deal with the truth.
Okay, so he was talking about, and the director's name was Jeffrey Robinson, and he gave that great video, I think, on the monuments, which is just such an interesting conflict that we have going on today. And I think probably one of the, as he sort of points out, one of the main things that separates a lot of what was going on in the 60s to what's going on now, because you never really had that debate in the 60s, you know, about the monuments and things like that. But it's like now it seems more of a, we're at least wanting to listen to tear down all of that stuff from the past that's just, you know, that doesn't seem to have a place. And one thing that he said towards the end was that he feels, you know, I think he said he was 11 years old when Dr. King was assassinated. He feels like we're on the cusp of something different. You know, even going through all that in the 60s, do you feel like we're in like this moment now, that we're truly on the cusp of something different? Priscilla, what do you think?
I certainly hope we are, because I don't like what's going on now. I've always been very bewildered about why people would stick to the Confederate flag and these monuments. And it was interesting to hear that explanation, that it was people telling us how they really felt, but we weren't listening. I was saying to Don earlier tonight, I really hope that this is not all the uproar and the angst of the 60s, which accomplished a lot, but it didn't accomplish everything. And I hope we can really, really make something happen so that we end up being a different society and different people.
What about you, Stan?
Mystic. I mean, I've seen this movie before.
Right.
Yeah.
So, you know, I look at what could be accomplished or changed to make things permanently different. And, you know, at the end of the day, it's all about money. What is the advantage to the power struggle to make things different? You know, we have the same issue that caused the riots in the 60s, police brutality, are the same things that are causing the riots now. People get upset, some cosmetic changes will be made, but what did we have, 100 and some odd shootings in Chicago last weekend?
Yeah.
At some point, somebody's going to say, well, we got to, we can't deal with this with kid gloves. We're going to have to, turn up, the police are going to have to be harder on people to get this violence under control. And then it'll just keep going down the same path that has gone on forever.
Yeah, given my history with some of this, it's a little hard to make a comparison, but I feel a lot like Priscilla does, in the sense that I really, really do hope that there is some meaningful change that comes out of this. But Stanley, I can see where you're coming from too. Yeah, we've seen this movie before, and There's always been a lot of talking going on, but not always a lot of concrete action. And I also tend to think that a lot of it is economic. We have an increasing disparity between those that have and those that don't have. And as that grows, I think it's going to get worse and worse. We've got to address that. I mean, I've been reading a lot lately about the lack of economic opportunity in a lot of inner city areas, just getting worse and worse, not better. And so the economic factors, I think, are driving a lot of what's going on. And we've got to find a way to change that. But a lot of the people that have don't want to give it up.
I definitely agree with Stan and in you all's point, but when he said that, it does feel like, at least from my perspective, just seeing, looking back again, I'm looking, back on it, what happened in the 60s, and then it sort of had its little moment bleeding into the 70s, but it seemed like it sort of fizzled, as far as the, protest and like the, fighting for rights, like the 70s towards the mid, end, it was just kind of gone. And I don't quite know the reason for that, but it feels like with this, we still have yet to see. But, I see just the protest in all 50 states. I think now we're over 30 days of continuous protest. I see such, like the 60s, I see such strength in the youth movement. I mean, my daughter has gone to already 2 or 3 protests. And she understands what she understands what she's doing, so it's not like a peer pressure thing. But
under the spotlight, this intense spotlight, police are still getting caught choking people.
Yeah,
this is true.
On their neck. And so, you would think with everything, with the focus on the brutality, somebody would say, hey, maybe you need to dial it back a bit, and all the cameras, but they're not.
They're not.
I think, like with the 60s, like Perry just said, it was a strong movement, and African Americans and blacks were moving to have something, to make a difference, to change their communities, and then it fizzled in the 70s. I think we cannot, as blacks, wait for someone to give us the money or to give us the opportunity. We're going to have to, as a culture, this is a cultural thing. We're going to have to change our attitude and our mindsets and our ways of doing things. We have to begin to use our common sense. No one's going to give us anything. We just can't Google our life away. So I think when I look at it, I look at the different cultures, Chinese, Hispanics, all those cultures and how they live, how they survive, and how they move forward. And I think after Big Mama died, maybe closer to the 70s, we stopped taking responsibility for ourselves, and we're sitting back waiting for someone to give us something, as opposed to being Tulsa, Oklahoma, and building a dynasty and working toward that. Because we can march all day long, and we can do many things. But like Martin Luther King said, we have to do some things for ourselves. And I just see I see the marches, I see the protests, I see the conversation. But do I see us making a difference in our own economic life, with our children, with our education, when moving forward? Those gang members, you said it was 100 shootings this past weekend. We do the research. What other culture shoots up each other? How do we change this mindset? Even with the Hispanics and the Latin King, they don't do many things to their children, or the mafia, or a different place. It's a cultural thing. We have to change our mindset, and it's because we're looking for someone to give us something, as opposed to all of our educated African Americans or black sitting down and saying, hey, where do we go from here?
and not to make an excuse, but we also have to, I think that's there's underlying problems with the violence, like the need for more social workers in school. What was said earlier, it's like even with the body cams and everything going on, you can still go on YouTube almost every day. There's a cop or somebody doing something, to an African American that they know they should, and feeling so emboldened to do it, even with a camera, which says to me that there's just so much emboldenedness to do this. Like, it's deeply rooted, like deeply ingrained, that you feel like you can get away with anything because that's been the history. So then it's like, so then as an African American, you get that anger, and luckily for me, my mom was able to channel, two angry boys at a young age to do other things differently. We had different opportunities. And, I give her a lot of credit for taking opportunities. And so I will say that, in a sense, blacks have to try to take the opportunities we have. But in the other sense, it's like I don't know how to reconcile those, still having that anger, even with all the opportunities I've had. I can't imagine someone, that hasn't had that with me, and how they grow up and how their lives project.
But that goes back to parental accountability and responsibility, all the way back to slavery and the 50s and the 60s, especially in the 60s, where parents were very accountable. We just can't, in our culture, moving forward now, where's the responsibility? Who has to be responsible for these individuals, or any individual with negative behavior? How do we solve that problem?
Well, just think about the late 50s, early 1960s, when they built all the housing projects in Chicago, tore down the tenements. They kept all the gang violence contained in certain. You knew Robert Taylor, you knew Ickes, you knew Cabrini Green, you knew they contained all of the violence, all the gang activity, all the drugs there, and communities like Chatham and parts on the west side were able to stay stable. So that's how they, during that time period, kept things in check. Then when they tore down all the housing projects and they dispersed people into certain zip codes and certain areas. So all we're seeing now is the projects just spread out across certain zip codes. And that is the way, at least in Chicago, that is the way that the poor black population is dealt with. If you drive through the west side, you drive through the south side, places where there used to be community mental health clinics, gone. Where there used to be boys and girls clubs, gone. Where there used to be the YMCA, gone. What's it replaced with? Liquor stores and abandoned buildings.
And churches.
And churches.
Lots of churches.
Okay, so what about the culture aspect? What other culture is similar to the black culture in living, behavior, education, families, common sense, parental approach? Who can we compare ourselves to as a black culture? Who are we like?
I don't think we're like anyone. I mean, if I think our closest would be, if you're talking about just the infliction, would probably be Native American.
Behavior, not taking responsibility, killing our own children, and drugs, not really wanting to get an education. So who can we compare ourselves to? What other culture all over the world?
I don't think we could compare to anyone, but I also would push back a little bit, because I feel like that's not. When you say compare culture, somehow in my mind, you're saying that's a majority of us, and I don't feel like that's a. I don't feel like that's a majority of us.
That's the common ailment of all poor and depressed cultures. Go anywhere around the world, and where people are uneducated and have no hope, you find senseless violence. Go to the Philippines. Go anywhere. Go to Africa. Go, go to the Middle East. Go to, the Philippines is Asia. That is what people who have no hope do. They self-medicate. Look at the Indian reservations.
Yeah.
They self-medicate. There's, unexplicable violence. That is the symptom. I don't know if symptom is the right way to phrase it, but that is what people who have lost all hope and all guides who have given up on humanity, that's the way they behave. The question is, what is the model that they took that from? Where did that violence come from that they believe? Where did that feeling that the only way to solve these problems is to act out and to act with violence? You have to ask, where did that come from? We in this country, we have the model of, might is right. Whatever you want, no matter who's there, you just take it. If you can be the strongest, you can take it. Look at what we did to the indigenous people here. We spoke earlier about Tulsa. The gentry decided we can't have that. We can't have them doing better than us. So they burned it down. So you reflect on what you see. My question would be, I know the answer, but it's you can't buy a firearm in the 606 zip code. You can't buy ammunition in the 606 zip code. But every gangbanger that's in Inglewood, Austin, West Chatham, wherever, every one of them has a firearm. How is that possible? We don't grow poppies in the United States. How come you can get heroin in all those corners?
Coming up for our last segment, I would like to get the panel's perspective on what impresses them most about how the youth of today are handling this moment of civil and social unrest.
Hi everyone, my name is Blanca Hines. I'm the founder and executive director of the not-for-profit organization She Influences. She Influences is an organization for women that focuses on promoting camaraderie amongst women instead of competition. Join me on this journey as we meet and connect with women that will motivate and empower you to reach your highest potential. She will influence you to persevere, succeed, and rediscover your worth.
Welcome back. Again, we are joined by Stan Lawrence, Burcy Hines, Priscilla Sibley, and Don Sibley. Priscilla, I'd like to start with you. What impresses you about the movement going on today, and what kind of words of encouragement would you give to a generation coming up in this climate?
It seems like more of a widespread outcry. And that's where my hope comes from, that this doesn't just fizzle out, because we can't stand to have these things happening. It just says something wrong about our entire culture. And so what I would say to the young people coming up is please don't be discouraged, because over the years, your parents have fought for things, your grandparents have fought for things. Sometimes they happened and sometimes they haven't. Kamala Harris is still trying to get a law in this country to outlaw lynching, which is just mind-blowing to me. Things we haven't accomplished yet. So please don't give up hope, and don't think there isn't a place for you in going forward.
Burcy?
I was thinking while she was talking, what am I encouraged by?
Good question.
I don't know. That has baffled me for quite a while. What is progressive? What is progressively coming out of these marches? people sticking together, people wanting to change laws, people wanting to change the police. What is happening here? I guess I might say I'm encouraged that we're talking to each other. You know, we're talking to each other. No matter where you go, if you're in the store, you're on your cell phone, or you go to church, everyone is talking about what's going on. And they're asking, how did this happen? How could this be? And with that, I think the police forces will change. I think most white people will think before they react and will change and see us differently, because they are surprised that someone could put their knee on someone's neck for 9 minutes and don't have any compassion. So I'm encouraged that we're having a conversation, possibly the same conversation we had with Dr. Martin Luther King in the marches, and telling us that white and black children need to play together and communicate together. And economically, we need to make changes. I think this has also made us look at ourselves as African Americans as entrepreneurs, coming up with different careers. And I think my encouragement is that now parents have to teach their children so they respect education, they respect teachers. So they're talking and saying, I didn't know it was this hard in school for a teacher. I didn't know it was this hard. So I'm encouraged to see that we're all talking and we're thinking. And maybe this will bring about the next move or change.
Okay, we're going to go with Don, and then Stan, can you close, please?
I think there is, my sense, and I would build off the conversation piece a little bit, I guess, in the sense that I feel that there's a lot more listening going on right now. There was a lot of talking in the past, not a lot of listening, but I think there are more genuine attempts to listen deeply to what people are saying and what they're feeling. And I think that's something that could bring about some changes. The other thing that I'm seeing, and I will continue to encourage young people to do this, is we're seeing more and more. I'm on the faculty at Loyola University, and a lot of students now are speaking out, and that hasn't happened before. And a lot of them are saying, this is what's wrong, this is what needs to change, this is what we need as students in this university. And I think that's also something that is having an impact now, and I think it will continue to have an impact because the university is listening, and they are taking those communications very, very seriously. I don't think that's happened in the past. So my encouragement to the young people is keep talking, keep speaking out, keep saying what it is you need to have happen to make real change take place.
No, I'm not encouraged. As I said earlier, we've seen this movie before. There has always been dialogue between, all the progressive people in the movement. I think one of the big differences between now and then is in the 60s, there was a defined look at what progress was, the opening of jobs to everyone, the end of segregation, spending money in building schools, better housing, the exact same things though that we're talking about now. So there really isn't much difference in what people are protesting for now than what they were doing, back in the 1960s. So I look at this time as I want to see what happens in November. Our political system has become so polarized. I mean, Republicans and Democrats alike agreed Richard Nixon was wrong. And no matter what you thought about him, he thought enough of the country to resign. We don't have that anymore.
No, we don't. We don't.
You know, it's party over country. And I'm not saying that the Democrats are always right, because there are some Democrats who have done some heinous things and things that are not in the betterment of good. We have a governor a billionaire who took the toilets out of a building just so he didn't have to pay his fair share on taxes.
Yeah.
You know, so it crosses both political parties. But what's going on in this current administration is something like we haven't seen since Andrew, since John, after Abraham Lincoln's assassination.
Andrew Johnson.
Yes, this administration is nuts. You know, the Attorney General is crooked. You know,
the president's personal lawyer.
Yes, we don't know, how the Supreme Court is or is not going to go. So I would like to see in these times and with the demonstrations, at least some focus and some realistic goals of what can be changed and vocalized, what needs to change. And for me, the first and foremost thing is a change in the administration in Washington, D.C.
Absolutely.
Until that happens, nothing else good can happen or will happen.
Yeah, we get 4 more years of this current administration. I hesitate to think what things are going to look like.
Exactly. Look how deep we're in debt.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And
right.
the polarization is only going to get worse.
Yes.
So I guess the other thing that I would say to the young people is, if you're old enough to vote, for God's sake, go out and vote.
I think young people are really going to go to the polls, and this will be my daughter's first chance to vote, and that's all she's talking about. She's really upset that she has to vote for Biden and can't vote for Bernie, but she's going to vote, and she's really engaged, and I think a lot of her friends are too. So. That's what I'm encouraged about.
The thing that we have to impress on, obviously we're all on the same page here, but the thing that we need to impress on everybody is that to not vote is a vote for Trump.
Yes.
And for the status quo.
Yes.
Yes.
You can't not vote, because that's basically going to give us 4 more years of what we got now, and Lord knows where that's going to take us.
And that's the main difference in the riots or the marches from the 60s than now, that they drove that home. Vote, 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 vote. That was just a passion to make sure you do this, because they knew that would make a difference. But I think moving for today, we say vote, we're going to get Mr. Trump out. But, has it really hit home today?
That's a good point, because look at all the people like Perry's talking about his daughter wanted to vote for Bernie, and everybody was talking about the Bernie momentum. Well, if he had the momentum, he'd be the presumptive nominee because people would have voted for him.
Right.
Good point.
The same thing happened 4 years ago when people were so polarized within the Democratic Party that they got behind their one candidate, and
Bernie.
And since Bernie Sanders didn't make it, they'd gone so far into a corner that they could not say, I will take the next best person, in my opinion, and vote for Hillary Clinton. They just said, what do we got to lose? And voted for Trump or didn't vote at all.
But I have to say that Trump is the president we deserved after Obama, because everybody thought, we're post-racial, the cotton's high and the living's easy. Trump is who this country needed to see as president to realize we still have a long way to go.
Yes, we do.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, and I guess if that's maybe the one positive thing that we could, he certainly opened our eyes.
Yes.
And the the most disturbing thing to me is the silence from all the other Republicans.
Mm-hmm. The fiscal conservatives.
Yep.
Where are you guys?
Where are you?
Right.
I mean, stand up and say something, but nobody wants to say anything. They just stand by and let it happen.
I always said something must be underlying there. What have you done that you can't open your mouth? You know, it's just from the Willie Lynch letter. So what's going on? You know,
Yeah, he has something on every single person.
It's what it seems like. He's got some dirty pictures of everybody or something. I don't know, but nobody's willing to stand up and say no. You can't do this.
Party over country now.
Yep, it is, and that's really, really scary.
I would like to thank my panel once again for joining us on today's episode of Perspectives. I firmly believe that there is so much value in learning from members of the older generation. Those that have come of age in the 50s and 60s are probably the generation that can best relate the most to the younger generation experiencing all that has been happening in our nation today. I'm Perry Diggs. Thank you for watching. I would like to thank my panel once again for joining us on today's episode of There's that thing in the way. Coming up in our last segment, I'd like to get to perspectives of what our panel thinks of the younger generation and what kind of advice they could offer moving forward.
cut.
I like that one.